Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today, I'm going to walk you through the metagame breakdown for the best decks that you can take to the upcoming Explore Best of 3, both the Qualifier play-in and the actual Qualifier event that's happening this following weekend towards the end of January. Today is the Best of 1 Qualifier. Then we'll kind of move to that. So we're going to cover the best decks, the ones that are winning the most, kind of give you a laydown of what's happening in the Explorer Pioneer meta at this current point. We're going to get the data from Untapped.gg, what you see on the screen. Companion tool that tracks user win rates, gives us all these stats that we're going to be referencing. Link to Untapped is in the video description. I will timestamp all these deck lists with the deck lists themselves in the video description so you can copy paste to your heart's content. So let's dive into it. We're going to start looking at the popularity, kind of what the breakdown is, what you can expect in terms of volume of games, and then we'll look at the deck lists themselves. So from Diamond to Mythic rank, for today, Rakdos Demons is representing the largest play rate at about 17-18%. We have Niv to Light, 5-color Niv Mizzet at 9%. Selesnya Taxes or Hate Bears at 6%. We have Rakdos Aggro, which is mono red aggro with some black splashes at 6%. Azorius Control at 3%. The Enigmatic Incarnation deck at 3%. And Mardu Greasefang at 3%. So notably, just kind of in terms of trends, the Demons deck has been very popular. You ban one card from the deck, it keeps living. Fable the Mirror Breaker kind of holds the format together. The Niv deck, since the release of Pioneer Masters, has shot up in terms of play rate as well. But let's jump into it. We're going to look January 11th through to today, the 18th. Diamond Mythic rank, we have 8,300 games of best of 3 played. Highest win rate deck is actually Mardu Greasefang. So this is a deck that got a couple new tools. It's evolved since previous iterations, and there's some configuration points. I'm actually building this. I just ordered my Overlord of the Bale marks that I was missing, and I'm happy to try this deck out. But the core of the deck in of itself is a pseudo combo deck that's built around the graveyard. What you're trying to do is put cards into your graveyard, notably Parhelion or Sky Sovereign, and then what you do is with Greasefang, it reanimates these. You could crew them, gives them haste, you get the attack trigger right away. So Parhelion in this case gives you 2 angels, attacks for 13 damage, pretty much closes out the game if it gets out from your graveyard. You put cards into your graveyard with Overlord of the Bale mark, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Fear of Missing Out, the Blood token, all ways to kind of go from there. Even in a pinch, you could Duress or Thoughtseize yourself to put the card into your graveyard. So some cool interaction with that there. One notable thing, a lot of the lists are kind of going with the Bankbusters in the side of as a 2 of, instead playing 3 Overlord of the Bale marks in the main. So that's maybe something you want to consider. And then the flex spot, like there's an extra Duress here. Sometimes you'll see Torch the Tower in the main. Vanishing Verse, really good against all the kind of creature aggro decks. They are monocolored. The fair game plan with the deck is just like Fables, Harvesters, Fear of Missing Outs, Overlords just for beatdown. So you kind of have the overarching looming threat of these Greasefang combos, but then you're also able to pull it in. A notable card in the mana base for a lot of these decks you'll see with the black base decks is Urborg, turning on all your lands to be swamps. It's a global effect, so it impacts your opponent as well. Deafening Silence is a card that's going to be used against Phoenix, Lotus Field, anything that's looking to play multiple spells per turn. Portable Holes, cheap removal, Bankbuster for the grindier games. So if you anticipate your opponent that's going to shift out or bring in a lot of graveyard hate, you can bring something like this in. Unlicensed Hearse, graveyard hate of your own. Wear Tear is a card that was printed, destroys artifacts, destroys enchantments, so flexibility there. You could also look at something like Exercise if you want. That gives you some flexibility there. Then a couple not... So Shieldred's sometimes played in the sideboard of these decks. Depends on how mid-range you want to go. You can kind of shift fully out of the Greasefang package and just play like Mardu mid-range. So that's something fine there. Nahiri's Thought is it helps you kind of filter your draw. It could be removal. It's also the ultimate, just threatens to pull Parhelion out. And if you have something to crew it, it gives Parhelion haste. So it's another way to cheat out Parhelion without having to use the graveyard. And then lastly, Blood Baron of Viscopa. So this is a card that was recently reprinted. I wouldn't suggest necessarily crafting the mythics on this. I would just probably play another Deafening Silence, play like a Torch the Tower, an Abrade, some sort of other removal just for the aggressive decks. The thought here is this will come in against like the black-based removal decks, since they'll have a pretty hard time killing it. This was a card that when it was printed originally, I remember putting it in my first Modern Birthing Pod deck and then running into green-white hate bears and then just them crying. But this was one of my favorite cards to play back in the day. Protection from white, protection from black, lifelink. If you have 30 or more life, it gets +6/6 and has flying. So kind of another top-end threat. But so these are kind of the flex spots in the sideboard. You can configure it in various ways. We then have Rakdos Demons. So there's actually kind of two versions of the Rakdos Demons deck that we'll kind of look at. This one's a smaller sample size, has a higher win rate right now. So this one here, the core of the deck is you're using the Unholy Annex as a demon effect, sorry, like a card draw that also makes a demon for you. So you have really powerful 3-drops in terms of Fable and that's your card draw engine. Then you just grind them out. Thoughtseize, Fatal Pushes, whole bunch of removal, Shieldred. This version's on Invoke the Despair, as well as Rakdos, Patron of Chaos. So at the beginning of your end step, target opponent may sacrifice 2 non-land permanents. If they don't, you draw 2 cards. So kind of a bigger top-end version of this. Your sideboard has Hand Hate, variety of different removal spells, Graveyard Hate. Hidetsuku's good against the low to the ground aggressive decks, Cat Oven, stuff like that. A lot of 2-for-1 effects, Kolaghan's Command, another Invoke Despair for the mid-range mirrors. Extinction Event's really good against like Mono Green and the Coco decks, stuff like that. And then Liliana as kind of a, if your opponent's going tall or the grindier matchups, you have Lily. So the more, not necessarily the next sequential in terms of win rate, but this is a more common version of what you would see. You'll see some number of Blade of Oni. So this is a 2-mana demon that plays nicely into the curve of going on Holy Annex on turn 3. Similar again, Shieldreds, this version's on Fear of Missing Out to help you draw discard style effects. Whole splattering of different removals, 7 discard pieces in the main, so really just kind of stripping your opponent. One thing with all these decks is you'll have access to Mutavault, which counts as a demon for the Unholy Annex, and again, the Urborg that's present here. Cheap removal, Dampening Spear is a nice play against Lotus Field, stuff like that. Feed the Swarm, just removal that also hits enchantments. Unlicensed Hearse for Graveyard Hate. Anger for low to the ground stuff. The Exile can be relevant against stuff like the Mono Red, the Mice deck. Potentially some of the, if you could catch your opponent with like Cat Oven against Phoenix, all relevant. Hidetsuku, like we mentioned, Extinction Event, and Invoke Despair for the mid-range mirrors. We then go to Gruul Bushwhack, so just a shade under 80%. So this is an aggressive deck that's looking to play multiple spells per turn. So something like Burning Tree Emissary lets you multi-spell. You are able to get value from plotting both Cunning Coyote and Aloe Alchemist. So you basically kind of dream is like Burning Tree into Aloe or Cunning Coyote. Aloe could boost up your 1-drop. Cunning Coyote could give haste to the Burning Tree Emissary. You kind of go from there. There's also the lines where Burning Tree can trigger the surge cost of Reckless Bushwhacker, which gives all your creatures haste and a bonus. Otherwise, when these plotted, you're able to get that second spell for the surge here. Otherwise, kind of a base mono red package like we see in standard, some Bone Crusher Giants on the top end. Claim the Firstborn for kind of the aggro mirrors, steal their thing, kind of go through there. Honestly, this you're probably going to want this slot to be like Screaming Nemesis for the mirrors. Red-based mirrors, it's a really strong card to have in there. Grafdigger's Cage for Collected Company, anything that's looking to play spells out of the graveyard. Pick Your Poison, Artifact Enchantment, Flying Hate, Red Capuli for the mirror. Rending Volley, Blue or White Things, Destructive Reveille for Artifact Enchantment Hate, Magebane Lizard for Phoenix, Lotus, anything that's looking to play a large number of non-creature spells. We then go to Mono Green. This one's incredibly mislabeled. There's not a single angel in sight, but this is Selesnya Devotion, Mono Green Devotion. Notable card that got printed here is Oath of Nissa. So looks at the top 3 cards of your library, reveal creature or land or planeswalker, put the rest to play. So you can play varied numbers of Invasion of Ixalan or Oath of Nissa. In this slot, it adds Devotion while providing some card advantage. Think of it almost like an opt that adds a pip of Devotion. Good starts are with Leyline of the Guild Pack in your opener, goes into play, adds 4 Devotion to green. Stuff like Sunken Citadel reduces the activation cost of Nykthos, but what you're trying to do is generate a whole bunch of mana, tap on tap with Kiora, kind of go to town. Once you start chaining together Storm the Festivals, Nykthos to generate huge amounts of mana, you're able to sink that mana into Uvenwald Oddity, which can transform and give all your creatures haste and trample for the turn. Version's got a Sire of 7 Deaths, as well as Elish Norn to double up your Enter the Battlefield style triggers. Sideboard has Deafening Silence for the Storm matchups, multi-spell matchups that are playing non-creature spells. Monstrous Emergence is removal that doesn't require you to have a creature in hand. You could just, in play. You can just show a creature from hand. Gives you basically like a turn 2 removal at times. Graveyard Hate with Unlicensed, Scrap Shooter, Artifact Enchantment Hate. Cetacean Petitioner as a way to gain life. Gargaroth, kind of bigger creature, and the kind of creature mirrors, the aggro mirrors, another nice place there. Ulamog goes over the top of mid-range decks. It's a cast trigger, so you can just exile permanents. Emrakul can take over your opponent's turn in the mid-range mirrors. Then we have 5-color Niv Mizzet. So a lot of 1-ofs here, and the reason being is because we have Bring to Light in the format. So Bring to Light has Converge, basically for the number of colors that you pay to cast it, so up to 5 colors. You could search for a creature, instant, or sorcery with mana value equal or less to that. So it gives you a toolbox of options. Obviously, as the deck's been named, Niv to Light, you can get Niv Mizzet Reborn that hits a whole bunch of multicolor spells. You could get Niv Mizzet Supreme that lets you flashback stuff. There's a cool interaction with Valki if you're unfamiliar. You could tutor Valki but then cast Tibalt, so cheat on the mana that way there. Up the Beanstalk draws you a whole bunch of cards. Sylvan Caryatid was a card that was recently printed that is untargetable mana accelerant, can block early. You have Ancient Cornucopia, can gain you a bunch of life. Obviously Leyline Binding in this deck, since it becomes as little as 1 mana to activate. So you can kind of look at something like that. You're seeing some of the Verges get played in the mana base as well. This is a Yorion Companion, but then it's basically just removal. You got Fables, you got some Omnats, and then just like Abrupt Decay, Lightning Helix, Molten Collapse, Pillage helps you dig, Vanishing Verse is removal, Clarion is a sweeper, Night of Autumn is removal or life gain, Pulse, Kolaghan's Command, Nahiri is a way to kind of find your top end, Deadly Cover-Up is a sweeper along with Sunfall, and then the Roaring Furnace as more removal. So a lot of ways to kill things with this deck. Your sideboard, cheap removal, hand hate, counters, graveyard hate, Cabal for like Phoenix, any multi-spell deck, Unmoored Ego for combo hate, Buzz Crusher can hit Lotus Field, Notion Thief for decks that are drawing a lot of cards like Phoenix, Yasharn for the sacrifice decks. So a whole bunch of silver bullets that you can bring in. We have Rakdos Aggro. So this one's at 67%. So these lists are starting to adopt the mouse package from Standard. We have Heartfire Hero, Emberheart Challenger, and Manifold Mouse. We also see some Screaming Nemesis in the main. So you have a couple of lines here. Core of the deck, very similar to Standard. You're pumping up your stuff. You have Infuriate as a better pump effect here. Monstrous Rage. You have Reckless Rage. A lot of your things can scale out with the prowess. So it deals 2 to your creature, 4 to opponents. Works really nicely with Screaming Nemesis, where you get to redirect that damage to either your opponent to shut off life gain or to kill 2 creatures effectively at the same time. You have Claim Fame, which can reanimate any of your smaller creatures and then give them haste on the flip side. Callous Sellsword as a fling style effect. So you have that kind of there. And then your sideboard, Claim for like creature mirrors, Fatal Push, cheap removal, Reckless Rage. You have Thoughtseize in here for hand hate, Feed the Swarm as removal, Claim Fame just for the grindier matchups, another Screaming Nemesis. A card I would strongly suggest in place of Claim Fame is Ob Nixilis the Adversary. In the grindier matchups, Ob Nixilis, like think against that Niv Mizzet deck that's just like removal spell, or a counter spell deck, or just grindier matchups. Rakdos midrange. It gives you multiple kind of threats and attacks at a different angles than strictly creatures. So strongly suggest Niv Mizzet in the sideboard. I have this deck in paper. And then we have Selesnya Taxes. So this is a hate bear style strategy. So 8 elves into a bunch of disruptive 3-drops. So you have Archon of Emeria, opponent's non-basics come into play tapped. They can't play more than 1 spell per turn. Shuts off Lotus Field, Phoenix, stuff like that. Aven Interrupter is a counterspell. Enduring Innocence is card advantage. Night of Autumn, flexible removal or life gain. Skyclave is removal along with Werefox Bodyguard. Bodyguard could also cover your own creatures, which is nice. Sometimes you'll see Eldrazi Displacer as a way to blink your own effects. This version here, you got Collected Company to pull together the room, a couple copies of Voice of Resurgence for decks that are playing at instant speed or just a lot of removal. It's effectively 2 bodies. Thalia for tax, Kellen is card advantage in the deck. Portable Holes, cheap removal, Back to Nature, really good against like the Enigmatic decks, any deck that's playing a lot of enchantments. Graveyard Hate, Anointed Peacekeeper is more tax effects. Brutal Cathar, Werefox, Bodyguard, more removal. And then if your opponent's bringing in like a lot of creature removal or just don't have a lot of creatures of their own, you could bring in Wandering Emperor, kind of cleaning up this space here. We have Dimir Ninjas, Dimir Tempo kind of effect. So this is kind of a upgrade in a way of the standard kind of tempo mid-range list. So you still have your Enduring Curiosities, your Kaidos to cheat in, your Flood Pit Drowners, but you have access to Thoughtseize. Fatal Push is more premier removal. Fairy Miscreant could potentially draw you cards. Spyglass from standard. Mockingbird copies a bunch of stuff. You have Ornithopter as basically a free spell that you can easily ninja it out since it's flying. Moonsurker Hacker is a ninja that can draw you cards on ninjutsu. So Touru draws you cards when creatures kind of cheat into play that way there. So lots of ways to kind of accrue card advantage. Brazen Borrows, some disruption as well. You then have cheap removal, more hand hate, disruption, cheap counters in like Spell Pierce, Disdainful Stroke, just basically a whole variety of removal as necessary, and then Unlicensed Hearse is Graveyard Hate. Again, Mutavault is a ninja as well. Mutavault's all types, so very strong with like stuff like Kaido's ability. We then have Azorius Humans. So base white humans deck, you have the kind of human synergies. Thalia's Lieutenant puts counters on all your humans and then gets bigger. You have Adeline that pumps out humans. Copper Coat is a Lord effect and provides ward. Bodyguard is protection. Hopeful Initiate gets bigger and then it could be Artifact Enchantment Hate. Mockingbird copies your stuff. Recruitment Artificer as card advantage. Thalia as tax. This version is playing Declaration Stone main as some more removal. Extraction Specialist can rebuy your cheaper stuff. And then Reflector Mage to kind of bounce tempo elements. There's a lot of incidental soldiers in the deck. Soldier. This one is Soldier. Thalia's a Soldier. So you get to play Fortified Beachhead as an additional kind of utility Lord style land, like pump effect. Again, Portable Hole, cheap removal. Anything that's cheating into stuff. You have Containment Priest. Get Lost is cheap removal. Rest in Peace, Graveyard Hate, Sheltered by Ghost for the aggressive matchups. Like Mono Red gives you some life link if you kind of say you make a big Adeline, kind of go to town. Reflector Mage has tempo elements in the more grindier matchups, Rakdos, stuff with sweepers or removals. Wedding Announcement attacks at a different angle, provides a lot of bodies. Speaking of control, we have Azorius Control, 59%. So this version here, we see just a whole bunch of Planeswalkers, Narset, Wandering Emperor, Teferi, bunch of sweepers. We see a split between Supreme Verdict, Sunfall, as well as Farewell. So sometimes you'll see companions. This version's not on any companions. Elspeth Smite, Otherworldly Light as cheap removal, bunch of cheap counters, some card advantage engines. Basically, you're going to kill everything, try to stick a Planeswalker for some card advantage, win with either like a Wandering Emperor, you have Anchorage, there's sometimes castles. This version's got a Hall of Storm Giants, no White Castle. You'll sometimes see Fountain Port. So there's a whole bunch of different utility lands that win the game. Sideboard for like the counterspell matchups, Control Mirrors, you have Shark Typhoon, Dream Trawler, just closes the door against a lot of creature decks. Narset for like Phoenix, any deck looking to draw a bunch of cards. Dispute for cheap counters. Knockout Blow predominantly for the red-based decks, but cheap creature decks can get a cost reduction. Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. High Noon for any deck that's looking to multi-spell, so Lotus, Phoenix, stuff like that. Dampening Sphere for the Lotus. Dovin's Veto as uncounterable counterspell. Izzet Phoenix, 59%. So this version here has got the Artist Talent version, so gives you another stickier way to loot whenever you cast non-creature spells to put Phoenix in the yard. One Proph's Edict, which can kind of buff up one of your creatures. We have Temporal Trespass, that was printed in Pioneer Masters. It's a Delve extra turn spell, so it could be blue. You have kind of the combo with Galvanic Iteration to take multiple turns. And then just a bunch of cheap draw, discard style effects. Notably with this one, which does seem quite wrong, is no Lightning Axe. So that seems very odd. I'm going to find a version of Phoenix that I think is a little tighter. You should have Lightning Axe in this deck. Lightning Axe, 1 mana, discard a card, or pay 4 additional mana to deal 5 damage. Otherwise, you don't have like a clean way to necessarily hit Phoenix, like Shieldred or stuff. It's also another nice discard outlet, so something to kind of keep in mind there that you might want to configure. I'll see if there's a kind of cleaner version with that card in there. But discard cards, play 3 non-creature spell, like instants or sorceries, get back Phoenix, Treasure Cruise refills your hand. Cheap like counters, Aether Gust, Disdainful negates, Dispute, same idea, Aether Gust red green stuff, a Braid for creature removal, but also can hate some artifact-based graveyard hate. Anger of the Gods as a sweeper for the more go-wide strategies. Beacon Bolt can scale damage. Brazen Borrow is a tempo element to bounce stuff. If they're attacking your graveyard a lot, you have the Prof's Plan. You also have Thing in the Ice as another way to kind of get around the non-creature stuff. Whew, we are going. 5-color Enigmatic. So it's very similar to Zur Overlords in Standard. You have Zur, you have the Overlord package. So you can cast them ahead of curve, animate with Zur, get that attack trigger right away. There's also ways with, like, if you say impend Overlord of the Hauntwoods, you can then sacrifice it to Enigmatic and then go get, for example, Linvala the Preserver or Overlord of the Boilerworks. If you have a Leyline Binding out, you can get a Traxel or Overlord of the Mistmoor, so it kind of scales you up in terms of that. Your 2-drop enchantments, nowhere to run, Beanstalk can upgrade to Conceal's Flanker for graveyard hate, Skyclaver's removal, Zur the Eternal as well. You have Yorion that can bounce all the ETB style effects, Thoughtseize for hand hate in the kind of control mid-range decks, graveyard hate, and Lotus, Phoenix, stuff like that with Arcan, aggro decks, mono red specifically, knockout blow, anything with a lot of ETBs. You have Elesh Norn. You have Rurik Thar is a nice thing for non-creature decks. 6 damage every time. Think like Magebane Lizard if they went to the gym every single day of the week. And then Thought Distortion as a way against the control style decks just to rip apart their hand. All right, we have Izzet Lotus Field. So the Sultai Lotus Field sub 50%. I think both decks people are going to play because it's a deck that people enjoy, these kind of combo-oriented decks. Probably has a bigger spread between very competent players and people who are just picking up the deck for the first time. How this deck wins: you have Artist Talent, draw, discards, a whole bunch of stuff. Expedition Map can help you find your Lotus Field. You get your Lotus Field into play, and then you start casting things like Pour Over the Pages, or Vizier of Tumbling Sands Channel, or Hidden Strings to tap and untap the Lotus Field. You're able with Thespian Stage to copy Lotus Field, start generating huge amounts of mana. Eventually draw through your deck. You can get Lier, which will then start generating, basically, you just start casting the stuff over and over from your graveyard, generate a whole bunch of mana, effectively drawing through your entire deck. You then cast Wish, and then go get Thassa's Oracle, which can win you the game off the ETB trigger. You can also, depending on the density of your deck, just get Niv, cast a whole bunch of spells, draw cards, ping your opponent to death that way there. You also have the ability to get like Lier, for example. Your sideboard, just cheap removal, Narset Reversal against counter spells, or Thoughtseize style effects, distortion, stuff like that. Anger is a sweeper. Filter outs can bounce, say, like all the non-creature, non-land. So it's a big kind of mass Cyclonic Rift for everyone. Upheaval, if you would, for 3 mana, buys you time, and then Leyline for the heavy Thoughtseize style decks, kind of from there. And then 2 other decks that have been picking up popularity. So this one got 5-0 from SWDJP MTG, but it's been picking up popularity across the various formats. It is the Neofrom Oculus deck. So how this deck's working: you have a bunch of 2-drop creatures. Augur Bolus basically comes in. It's a 2-drop that helps you dig through your library for non-creature spells. Satyr Wayfinder mills you over, fills your graveyard to help you cast Oculus the Fairway. It's also a 2-drop. Balaji, same thing as Augur. Thundertrap Trainer, kind of same thing. Same concept as Augur. Ideally, what you're trying to find is Neoform. So Neoform, basically, you sack one of these 2-drops, it goes and pulls into play Abhorrent Oculus. So on turn 3, you're able to have an Oculus in play with a variety of protection effects. Essence Flux to blink it, Fading Hope could return it to hand, Stubborn Denial becomes basically 1 mana counter non-creature spell. Then you have Tyvar Stand as an indestructible effect. So a bunch of ways like that. Brushwhack can be early land drops and then removal in terms of fight. Uvenwald, similar idea. So that's kind of the main board game plan. March of Swirling Mist can protect your stuff. Ghost Vacuum for graveyard hate. Flood Maw is more bounce. Dispute is cheap counters. Natural State, artifact enchantment hate. They go after like the graveyards, for example. Negates, even like things like Grafdigger's Cage can hit. So pretty much all the graveyard hate. Paw Patch, another way to deal with some hate pieces. Big flyers. Disdainful Stroke for big mana. Test Talents is a nice kind of Surgical Extraction-esque counterspell, unable to scream as removal. And then lastly, so from the Arena ladder, Jund Sacrifice has been doing really poorly the last week. It's sub 50%, but people are going to play this deck. This is a very popular deck. Folks love it, like this archetype. So it's the Cat Oven deck, Cauldron Familiar, which is Oven, Mayhem Devil, Fable. So you kind of go with that fair ping them to death route. There's also the Yurga package. So how it works is Yurga in play, 2 Cauldron Familiars can consistently loop themselves because they're food tokens. So you drain them out basically that way there. And then you're able to kind of filter into the combo through Scavenger's Talent. Through each of the modes are super relevant. Creature dying, you get a food token. Sack something, you self-mill, so you can self-mill into the combo, finding your cats or your Yurgas. And then chapter 3 lets you kind of mass reanimate that stuff there. Sideboard, you have like Up Nixless, the kind of mid-rangey matchups. Haywire Might hits hate pieces. Thoughtseize hits hand hate. Chandra's Defeat for the mono red matchup. Unlicensed Risk for graveyard hate. Paw Patch hits hate, like various hate pieces. Big Flyers. Torch Tower. Duress is hand hate. Heartless Act. And the Dampening Sphere for the Lotus Fields. Stuff like that. So the only other deck that you may encounter is the various Indomitable Creativity piles. They sometimes go to Valgavoth or Traxa. They can do the combo route. They haven't been doing that well this week. You sometimes see them as Jund, sometimes see them as Izzet. So if you do really want one of those lists, just look on my Aether Hub, type creativity, and you can find them there. They haven't changed too much since the past. So that's your big breakdown. Good luck to all those competing. Hope you have fun and a lot of success. If you like this type of content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.